All right, thank you, Dean. Thank you for the nice introduction. Thanks to all of you for being here. So, I was here a few years ago. I'm delighted to be back, and now I have a challenge before me that I didn't quite expect. Because, as you can see, it is an unbelievably chilly day here in North Carolina. We are in a windowless room, and we've got roughly 1,000 people who are on the brink of digesting a large meal. And I am here to talk to you about motivation. So, I appreciate the challenge. All right, so I do want to talk to you about motivation and how it connects to teaching in the economy. Now, already I can see a few skeptical faces there because I'm not going to talk about motivation sometimes in the way you often see at big gatherings like this, because you've seen this movie before, right? You got a bunch of people sitting down, you got one dude standing up, and the topic is motivation, and certain conventions seem to follow from that. So maybe you expect me to talk about the time that I scored the game-winning three-point shot in a championship basketball game and how that taught me the indomitability of the human spirit. I would love to tell you that kind of story. Honestly, I would. Especially in North Carolina, I would love to tell you that kind of story. I found, though, growing up in the American Midwest, it was very, very difficult to hit the game-winning shot when you kept getting cut from the team. So I can't talk about motivation from that perspective. Other times you hear people talk about how some great, I think these are cool, some kind of triumph where they climb Mount Everest. Let me tell you about the time I climbed Mount Everest in 80-degree below zero weather with my 2-year-old child and our family cat who injured its paw during the... I've never done anything like that either. I'm a pretty boring guy. I want to talk about motivation, in particular how it relates to teachers and how it relates to the economy. But I want to talk about it from the perspective of science. What does science tell us about what really motivates people on the job? Whether it's the job of teaching schools, whether it's the job of being a veterinarian, whether it's the job of working in a technology company, whatever. What does science tell us about what really motivates people? Over the last 50 years, a group of social scientists all over the world, including many represented actually in this region of the country, I mean, just, NC State, UNC, and Duke, have taken a very hard-headed, very empirical look at that question. What motivates us? What motivates people to do good work? What motivates people to go the extra mile? What motivates people to really achieve? And I want to tell you about what they found out. But first, I want to recognize it's a strange question to ask, what motivates us, because every single person in this room is an expert in motivation. They're an expert in motivation, not just because many of you are educators, but because all of you are human beings. You have a very deep and sophisticated knowledge of motivation. But as many teachers will tell you, as Jane could probably tell you, when we understand the world, when we know things, we have explicit knowledge and implicit knowledge, all right? And implicit knowledge is knowledge we have, but we don't necessarily know that we know it, okay? And I think our motivation is, we know a lot about motivation, but we're not exactly clear what we know, right? Let me just give you a weird, somewhat tortured analogy here, all right? Let me just see here. How many of you, let's see a quick show of hands here. How many of you, I'm going to try to make an analogy here about implicit knowledge. How many of you majored in physics in college? How many physics majors do we have here? Okay, it looks like less than half of you majored in physics. But every single person in this room has a very deep and sophisticated knowledge of physics in a way that's actually kind of breathtaking. I can demonstrate that to you. So this stage, the folks in the cheap seats might not be able to see this, but this stage is about 1 meter off the ground, okay? I weigh about 83 kilos. All right, and I am the only American who uses the metric system. Well, you know what happened? I was in third grade. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. In third grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Williams, wonderful teacher, and she said, in a few years, the United States is going to go fully metric. I'm like 9. I'm going, oh my God, I got to get on this. Anyway, 82 kilos, the meter off the ground. Make a prediction make a prediction. What will happen if I take one step this direction and another step this direction? It will fall. Very good. Now, how did you reason your way through that? You did it. All right. Think about how quickly you answered that question. You didn't stop and deliberate over that. You didn't say, 1 meter, 82 kilos. the law of gravity is vigorously enforced in this state. You just knew it, right? It's implicit knowledge, all right? And that's the way it is, and that's powerful. That's a very sophisticated form of reasoning you just did, and you did it in literally, like less than a second. It's extraordinary. But that's what implicit knowledge is. And our knowledge of motivation is very much like that. It's implicit. We don't say the laws out loud very often, but we have this implicit knowledge, and we act on it every single day. in our workplaces, in our classrooms, in our legislatures. We act on this implicit knowledge. And the implicit knowledge we have of motivation is very simple and mechanical. It goes like this. When you reward behavior, you typically get more of it, right? Yeah, this would be the interactive part of the presentation. And if you punish behavior, do you get more or do you get less? Less. Rewarding behavior gets you more, punishing it gets you less. Very simple mechanical laws of motivation. We don't say it out loud, but we know it and we act on it every single day. But here's the great thing about science, and here's the great thing about, this is why I revere academics, why I revere large research institutions like you have in this area. Scientists take claims like that and say, maybe let's just humor me a little bit. Maybe that's not a settled law, a settled fact. Let's declare that a hypothesis. And over the last 50 years, social scientists of many, many varieties have tested that hypothesis. And I'm going to give you a top-level version of what they found. Then we'll talk about it in a more granular level. But the very super-duper top level of what they found in 50 years of research is this. When you reward behavior, you do get more of it. Sometimes. When you punish behavior, you do get less of it. Sometimes. But not all the time. And here's the kicker, not nearly as much as we think. And so if we go into our encounters, whether we are managing an organization, whether we are standing in front of a classroom, whether we are making laws about how to treat teachers, and our laws of motivation are a little bit off, we're going to make some mistakes. And if we don't correct those mistakes are going to compound. So what I want to do here is recalibrate, not based on any kind of philosophical point of view, but really based on what the facts say of motivation. And what I want to do here is I want to come at this issue in just two simple ways. In two simple ways. Wait, there you go. That's what you were waiting for. Two simple ways. I want to talk about, there's one conceptual idea I want to leave you with. It's going to be important whatever you do for a living. And then I want to bring it into teachers, because that's what we're talking about here. And one of the big issues facing public policy in this state and others is, how do we motivate teachers? How do we get good teachers? How do we reward good teachers? And that's a big issue, and, well, you'll see in a moment what I think. Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's talk about the big idea, the big idea, the big idea. I'm going to give you the key conceptual idea. I'm going to give you one study. I'm going to go easy on you here, okay? One study that encapsulates this. If you remember nothing else, I want you to remember this one big idea. And here's the study that I think embodies this very nicely. It's a study done by a group of economists, two neoclassical economists, two behavioral economists from prestigious institutions. One is actually now at Duke, was at MIT, somebody from Carnegie Mellon, University of Toronto, UC San Diego, first-rate institutions. And they did a series of 9 experiments, and they did them in 2 different places, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Madurai, India. And it was a very simple, very elegant experiment. Here's what set of experiments. Here's what they did. They had their participants do a series of challenges, physical challenges, throw a ball through a hoop, cognitive challenges, memorize these strings of digits, alphabetize this stuff quickly. More complicated cognitive challenges, solve this math problem. Still more complicated cognitive challenges, come up with solutions to problems that are a little bit murky, come up with ways to ideate, come up with more creative approaches, creative kinds of exercises, okay? Kind of rode the escalator upward. And they treated everybody the same except for the amount of reward that was promised to them. The amount of reward that was promised to them. So, they said to this group, 3 groups. Group 1, if you're one of the top performers, you get a little bit of money. They said to group 2, if you're one of the top performers, you get more money. You, in fact, get 10 times what this group is getting. With me? They said to group 3, If you're one of the top performers, you get even more money. You, in fact, get 10 times what the second group is getting. Okay? Now, again, for those of you with a more liberal arts background, that means that this group can make 100 times more than that first group. So what we have here is large, medium, and small rewards, right? Small, medium, large. We know that when you reward behavior, you get more of it. So we expect our prediction in this study. And the one reason they did this in India was that in India, the reward was equivalent, in this group over here, was equivalent to 4 months' pay. So serious motivator. We expect that this group will outperform this group, and this group will outperform that group. And you know what, ladies and gentlemen? That's what happened. As long as the task involved only mechanical skill, bonuses worked as they would be expected. The higher the pay, the better the performance. This group here beat this group, which beat this group. Not that interesting. About what we expect. But here's where it gets a little more interesting. Here's what they say. But once the task called for even rudimentary cognitive skill, that's their phrase, not mine, rudimentary cognitive skill, a larger reward led to poorer performance. Whoa! This is strange. This is freaky. This is disturbing. It's very disturbing. I mean, as I said, I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, you know, middle class, middle brow. This is very disturbing to an American like me. This seems vaguely like socialism, right? What? A larger reward leads to poorer performance? Maybe that's the case in a place like France, but that can't be true in North Carolina and Ohio. That's not the way it works here in the United States of America. Well, for those of you who are concerned about the specter of socialism, let me point you to the footnote there. Look at the notoriously socialist group that sponsored the research, the Federal Reserve Bank. So here you have 4 economists doing research funded by the Fed coming to this conclusion that's at odds with that implicit knowledge we think that we have about motivation. And here's the thing. Social scientists have been finding this out for 50 years, over and over and over again. Here's the takeaway. There's a certain kind of reward that we use in organizations, in public policy, in schools. Psychologists call it a controlling contingent reward. I call it an if-then reward. If you do this, then you get that. If you do this, then you get that. We use all kinds of rewards, but this is the mainstay reward. If you do this, then you get that. Here's what 50 years of research tells us about if-then rewards. Not all rewards, not money in general, just this one category of rewards. If-then rewards are great for simple and short-term tasks. They work really well. They're awesome. Why? Well, let's think about that for a second, because there's some nuance here to what these scholars have found. Question, do we like rewards? A little or a lot? We frickin' love rewards, right? I'm going to talk a lot about intrinsic motivators. It doesn't mean that we don't like rewards. We love rewards. They get our attention. They get our attention in a certain way. They get our attention like this, in a fixed, controlled kind of way like that. All of us respond to that. So if Jane or the organizers here, or Governor Hunt, were to say to me, Dan, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $500 to stand on the corner of this table on one leg for 5 minutes consecutively. Give you $500 to stand on one leg on this corner for 5 consecutive minutes. I'm there, okay? Now, how would I go about that task? Would I be focused or not focused? I'd be focused like a laser beam on that, right? I would know exactly what to do. I'd figure out which leg to stand on. I'd look around for a clock. I'd be locked in. I would do actually quite a spectacular job on that, as many of you would, because of the motivator, because of the reward. It gets you focused, locked in. Now, somebody could be going into cardiac arrest over here. There could be a small fire breaking out in the corner over there. I'm not noticing that because I'm locked in. That's a very good frame of mind when you know exactly what you need to do for work that social scientists call algorithmic. Algorithmic, where you're following an algorithm, following a recipe, following a set of steps. So for that kind of work, simple, short-term, follow the algorithm, if-then rewards are great. They get us to focus and lock in. But the same body of research tells us that if-then rewards are not so great for complex and long-term work. Why is that? Let's go back to first principles here. Actually, the explanation here is rather simple. Go back to my question earlier. Do we like rewards? Yes. A little or a lot? Okay, remember, the answer is we freaking love rewards, right? They get our attention. How do they get our attention? Like this. That's a very good frame of mind if you know precisely what you need to do, precisely where you need to go, and there's a clear finish line there. But let's say you're dealing with something more complicated. Let's say you're dealing with something that's been complexified. Let's say you're trying to come up with a new idea. Let's say you're trying to invent something. Let's say you're trying to solve a problem, and you're not even sure exactly what the definition of the problem is. Looking at the problem like this actually works against you. You want to be looking more expansively. You want to be looking more expansively. You want to take something over here, combine it, and turn it upside down. So if-then rewards are extraordinarily ineffective for complex and long-term work for the same reason they're extraordinarily effective for simple and short-term work. Now, a couple things about this. Let's say this again. If-then rewards, great for simple and short-term work, not so great for complex and long-term work. Okay? If-then rewards are great for simple and short-term work, and not so great for complex and long-term work. Now, here's a couple things about this. Number one, this is not even a close call. This is not even a close call. Scientists have been finding this out for 50 years. Okay? No one's really working on this anymore. It's so well settled. You're not going to get tenure working on this here, right? Because it's like getting tenure. Oh, I'm going to try to get tenure on the law of gravity. I've noticed this thing. When I let go of this, can you believe it, advisor? The problem is it hasn't migrated into the world of organizations enough, and it certainly hasn't migrated into the world of public policy enough. Now, this ought to alarm us. It suggests that we're making decisions in public policy and other things based on guesses, folklore about what motivates people, rather than on the evidence, which would be intolerable in other kinds of fields. Intolerable to say, I'm going to make my accounting decisions based on accounting folklore, rather than the rules of accounting. I'm going to make my decisions about medicine based on my intuition about what's wrong with the patient, rather than what the evidence actually says. We would find this intolerable in any other realm. The other reason this should alarm us is this, that, let's go back here to the phrase that pays. Let's go back to teachers here for a moment. How many of you are teachers? Classroom teachers, okay? So this is a question for you. How many of you, in your day-to-day work as classroom teachers, draw on rudimentary cognitive skill or above? Yeah. That's what everybody in the workforce is doing. This is what every conference here is about at some level, right? When you talk about manufacturing last year, you're not talking about people doing the same repetitive tasks over and over again. You're talking about advanced manufacturing, where people have to use judgment and discernment and creativity. When I was here a few years ago to talk about creativity, we're talking about how the economy is being transformed so the work is less algorithmic and requires more judgment and creativity and conceptual thinking. So what we have here is a set of motivators, not all motivators, but these motivators that are great for 19th century work, not bad for 20th century work, but have kind of outlived their usefulness for most 21st century work. Now, what frustrates me about this is that people have a hard time wrapping their minds around it, and we saw an example of this just last week. There was another study, what's called a meta-analysis, that just came out a week ago. This is the site, if any of you want to take a look at it, that went back and looked at these 40 years, saying, okay, let's just double-check this one more time. And basically, what they found out is like, yeah, I guess it's kind of true. They had an interesting way to reframe it, which I thought might be useful in your understanding. They said, essentially, if-then rewards are great when you're going for the quantity of performance, but not so great when you're talking about the quality of performance. It's actually an interesting way to look at it. So that's what we're after. We're not after, you guys are not in the quantity business. You're not in the processing business. You're in the quality business, okay? So it's a big idea. It's very important to know. It has applications in all of our lives. So now let's talk about motivation with regard to teachers. So We have this body of evidence accumulated over half a century saying that if-then rewards, while they're effective for simple algorithmic work, they're less effective for more complicated, complex work. So, the latest rage in public policy is this. Let's use if-then rewards for teachers. Let's tie teacher pay to performance on test scores. An idea that's not totally above the surface here in North Carolina, but is basically gurgling everywhere. It's been tried many, many places. Now, there's some theoretical flaws. Number one, it flies in the face of all the evidence. But let's forget about that. There's another inherent flaw. It's a diagnostic flaw. It suggests that the problem in American education is that teachers are insufficiently motivated. Now, I don't know anyone who's ever met a teacher who's thought that. I find that teachers are the most profoundly, at some level, the most insanely motivated people in the American workforce. So I think it's a misdiagnosis, number one. There's another flaw straight out of the gate, too, which is this. Here you have school teachers, and somebody was saying this earlier this morning. You know, school teachers, by their very choice of profession, are signaling to the world, money is not the most important thing in my life. And so, let's try to motivate them with money. So that's 3 strikes right there, and you know, the way I play baseball, you're out. But unfortunately, there's kind of a different set of rules here. So we've been trying this. We've been experimenting with this. Not experimenting, we've been doing this in places. And fortunately, smart people have been studying it. And let me tell you, you're going to be shocked when you find out what happened. Let me tell you what happened. Nashville public schools try this. Middle school math teachers, here's what they do. Half the middle school math teachers are paid as usual. Half the middle school math teachers are said, you can make a bonus of $15,000 if your students' test scores go up. $15,000, that's real money, right? It's a lot more than I got for this, right? $15,000 that's real money, right? So, it's a wonderful experiment, well-designed, done by the folks at Vanderbilt. They don't have a dog in this fight. There's a lot of ideology here, obviously, on this kind of issue. These are people who don't have a dog in the fight. They test this out. 3 years! What's the difference in test scores between this group and this group? Here's what the researchers at Vanderbilt said. We sought a clean test of the basic proposition. If teachers know they will be rewarded for an increase in their students' test scores, will test scores go up? We found that the answer to that question is, shockingly, no. No difference. No difference. All right, now, but Nashville's not quite big enough, so maybe we should play around with, say, the New York City public schools. Yeah, let's try that. Try that in New York City public schools. They bring in a third-party evaluator. Again, not a place with a dog in the fight, okay? The Rand Corporation. The Rand Corporation, about as kind of nerdy and dispassionate as you can get, right? I obviously mean that in a positive way. No, I do, seriously. They study the New York school system of trying to give teachers bonuses, contingent bonuses for test scores, and here's what they find. The results of this evaluation add to a growing body of research from the United States that finds no effects on student achievement of narrow pay for performance policies. No effect there either. Okay, so we've now taken 2 of the largest school systems in the United States and run actual real field experiment based on, with results that most of us could have told you ahead of time. Now, just to be fair to the research, there is a couple of examples. There's one or two examples in overseas in India where there actually was, like if you pay, there's huge absenteeism issues among public school teachers in India. And there was evidence showing that if you paid them for showing up each day, they would show up, okay? So that's just to be fair. And there's also in Chicago, there is one version of this that has worked. I want to be true to the research here because I think it's really important. There's so much ideology on either side here. Let's just look at the facts. What do the facts tell us? There was one instance where these if-then rewards connected to student test scores, that giving teachers an if-then reward actually led to higher test scores. It was in the Chicago public schools, and here's what they did. They did it a little differently. Half the teachers in one, oh no, it wasn't in Chicago Public, it was Chicago Heights, forgive me. You're paid as usual, but this group, we do it a little differently here. We do it a little differently. Instead, the bonus works like this. At the beginning of the year, we give you a $4,000 bonus on top of your salary. But if your students don't hit a certain level on the test scores, at the end of the year, you have to give that bonus back. And that worked. Just to be fair here, framing a teacher incentive in terms of losses rather than gains that led to improved student outcomes. Now, there's some other potential liabilities with that approach. Destroying morale of teachers. And you also lead to, and this is a big problem we have with these kinds of contingent bonuses, you can also see this leading to the specter of bad behavior. We've seen this in the state of Georgia, where there are literally indictments because of this. We saw this in my home. I live in Washington, D.C. In Washington, D.C., we had these very severe, one aspect of them was actually sensible, but in general, these very high-stakes contingent bonuses tied to test scores, and we had a little program known locally. This is a little bit of local D.C. public school knowledge. We had a program locally that became known as Erase to the Top. So there's some other downsides here. But in general, this doesn't work very well. Okay, so if then rewards for simple stuff are great, for complex stuff just aren't so great, teachers do complex stuff, period. Now, let's turn the corner and talk about what works a little bit better. And here there's some nuance, and here I think it's very apt about what's going on in North Carolina. So let's start here. I'm going to turn the corner and talk about what's going to work better. What's a framework that we can use to be more effective here? Let's start here. Fact, money is a motivator. Fact, money is a motivator. Now, all of you, immediately, you're smart, you're educated. You know that's a fact because I wrote fact in capital letters right on top. But this is something, again, as I said, I live in Washington, D.C. I grew up in the Midwest, but live in Washington, D.C. This is something that we Washingtonians refer to as a true fact. Okay, this is really the case. Because we got facts, and then they're true facts, too. And this is a true fact. This is really the case. Money matters, okay? I'm going to talk about these intrinsic motivators. It doesn't mean that money doesn't matter. Money matters a lot. Money matters a heck of a lot. But it matters in a slightly more nuanced way than we think. Here's what the research shows very clearly. You've got to pay people enough. If you don't pay people enough, they are not going to be motivated. People measure enough. Basically, it's this. Human beings in general, human beings in the workplace in particular, are exquisitely attuned to the norm of fairness. If you violate the norm of fairness, you are toast. What does that mean? If you got two people doing comparable work in an organization and one's getting paid more than another for the same kind of work, same level of contribution, you've destroyed the other person's motivation. If you've got people doing comparable work in one kind of organization, one kind of labor market, and a similar situated organization, the labor market, they're paying more, you've got people who are demotivated. Human beings are explicitly attuned to the norm of fairness. Now, what's so exciting about being here today is that you guys had, and forgive me for being an outsider and telling you that something's not going right here, but you guys had what I would argue is a not insignificant fairness problem. And you can embody it on this chart right here. This is a chart of average teacher pay sorted in the 50 states. You've got to look way down the list, guys. Average teacher pay in North Carolina comes in, well, you come in above Oklahoma, Mississippi, and South Dakota. All right? Now, there's no way that if you're a teacher in this state and you look at this, you can say, oh, I'm being paid fairly. Now, hats off to the governor, the current governor. I always think of, when I say the governor, I always think of Governor Hunt, but we have hats off to the current governor for actually proposing a remedy of this. Now, it's a very, very important first step. It's starting teacher pay. That's a very, very important first step. This is average teacher pay, though. All right? And so, but I think what this suggests, though, is I think there is a political bargain to be had here. And I think it's important that educators get behind this political bargain. I don't think that teachers, in general, I don't think any of those teachers, no matter what state they're in, get paid enough. All right? I don't think teachers get paid enough, period. All right? But I think there's a great bargain to be had here. There's a great, wait till you hear my bargain. Because it's something that the left will hate and it's something that the right will hate, which to me suggests, hey, this might actually work. I think there is a much easier bargain. The bargain goes like this. I applaud the governor for a very appropriate, powerful first step. I really do. But let's go beyond that and let's do this. Here's the bargain. Let's raise the base pay of teachers significantly, but make it easier to get rid of underperforming teachers. And I think if you do that, that's a bargain that will, see, I knew everybody wasn't going to be into that. That's a bargain that I think is politically viable, and I also think that it's just, and I think that it comports with the evidence. Let's raise the base pay of teachers. They don't get paid enough, but there are teachers, like there are accountants, like there are lawyers, like there are veterinarians, like there are electricians who just aren't that good, aren't good enough, and they have to go. So if we do that, so here's the paradox here. The best use of money as a motivator in many cases is to pay people enough to take the issue of money off the table. I got 3 kids. I don't want my kids' teachers focused on money. I want them focused on what the kids are learning. And so for mechanical work, getting people focused on the money is great. For sophisticated work, you want to focus on the work. One way to get them focused on the work is to pay them enough so they're free to focus on the work itself. Once you do that, it turns out there are 3 enduring motivators, 3 motivators for enduring performance. They are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. I'm going to talk a little bit about autonomy and mastery as it goes to teachers, and then I hope we'll have some time for questions. Autonomy. To understand autonomy, excuse me, we have to understand this word right here, management. We take this word too seriously. We take this word way too seriously. We think that management is something that emanated from nature, something that's always been here, something that God gave to us. But that's not the case. Let's think about it more analytically. Management is just something that some guy invented. Management is a technology. It's a technology for organizing people into productive capacities. It's a technology from the 1850s. There are very few 1850s technologies we use today, right? Well, I have to go to Atlanta later, so apparently snow removal is an 1850s technology there. Think about this. Anybody have a wireless device? How many of you have a telegraph? All right, 1840s technology, okay? We've upgraded our technology. Management is a very powerful technology. It's a brilliant technology, but it's a technology designed to get compliance, to get people to do what you want them to do the way you want them to do it. Now, we still need compliance, but with our teachers and with our students, we don't want I don't want teachers who are merely compliant. Teachers don't want students who are merely compliant. You want people who are engaged, right? And here's the thing. Human beings don't engage by being managed. Each one of you as individuals, you don't engage by being managed or controlled. The way that human beings engage is through self-direction, by getting there under your own steam. That's how you engage. That's how the people you love engage. That's how your students engage, all right? That's a human condition. We don't engage by being managed or controlled. Now, if you're skeptical of this, particularly if you have a role where you're managing people, just, next break, ask somebody this question. Hey, tell me about the best boss you ever had. Tell me about the best boss you ever had. Very rarely will you hear people describe the best boss they ever had like this. Oh, the best boss I ever had, she was amazing. She breathed down my neck the whole time. She told me exactly what to do and precisely how to do it. She was unbelievably, almost pathologically controlling, and as a consequence, I was utterly compliant. It was the best working relationship of my life. You don't hear that. Ask this. Ask a teacher to describe the best principal he or she ever had. Invariably, you will hear what you hear throughout the workforce, which is this: high standards and autonomy. High standards and autonomy. So I don't think we need to manage teachers, okay? I think that's a mistake. I think what we need to do at some level is liberate teachers, is allow teachers more self-direction. And as Pasi was telling us, this is what they do in Finland. This is what they do in Finland. Now, so what does that mean? It means giving people a little bit more sovereignty, control over when they do what they do, what they actually do, who they do it with, and how they actually do it. There's a dangerous move in my part of pure standardization where we think that it's virtuous if on the third Wednesday of March in third grade classes in North Carolina, we want every class to be doing precisely the same thing. I find that terrifying. I find that counterproductive. What we want is actually in some ways to go the other way, is to say, well, wait a second. We have these trained professionals called teachers. Give them some say. Allow them some sovereignty over what they do, how they do it, when they do it, and who they do it with, and I think things will turn out pretty well. Let me give you one aspect of this. Let me give you one particular technique, because I want to be able to give you a couple of takeaways. I want to be able to give you a technique that's emerged. I write mostly about business, that's emerged in the business world that I think you can import to the world of education very, very nicely. One example of it comes from this company right here, an Australian software company called Atlassian. They do something really cool. Once a quarter on Thursday afternoons, they say to their software developers, for the next 24 hours, go work on anything you want. Do it the way you want, do it whatever you want, do it with whomever you want. The only thing we ask is that you show what you've created to the rest of the company on Friday afternoon in this fun freewheeling meeting. They call these things FEDEX days because you have to deliver something overnight. I should be clear, they called them FedEx days because this summer they got a cease and desist letter from FedEx, so they now call them Ship It days. Regardless, this one day of intense, undiluted autonomy has led to a whole array of fixes for existing software, ideas for new products, improvements to internal processes that had otherwise never emerged. This is a very different underlying theory of motivation. It's not saying, if you do something groovy, I'll give you a carrot. It's saying we hire good people. Good people want to do good things. One way to help good people do good things is to get out of their way for a day. I'll give you another example of this, because a lot of these examples which are gurgling out there are not in companies you necessarily heard about. Think about this. Here's a company. It's not even a company. It's a credit union. Columbia Credit Union in Vancouver, Washington. They have a young woman there named Jen Scheffner. She's 28 years old. She runs a 6-person customer service department. They answer phones from credit union members. Jen, says to her boss, I want to have a FedEx day. Her boss says, no. So she does something else. She says to her team, here's what I want you to do. 1 hour every week, I want you to leave the phones. Go somewhere else. Think about a better way to run this place. Think about something that we're not doing for our members that we should be doing for our members. Think about something a process we have that doesn't make any sense. 1 hour a week and I'm your boss, I'll cover your phones while you're gone for that hour. She calls these things the genius hour. 1 hour a week of autonomy. Lo and behold, all these great ideas coming from the 6-person customer service department. I think what's so exciting here is that, and I think teachers have an intuitive sense of this, we talk about accountability. Autonomy is the pathway to accountability. It's not a detour from it. The way that talented people achieve accountability is if you give them some freedom. And so what's great about this, these ideas are spreading into schools. So how about this? How about a FedEx day for teachers? How about for the next professional development day, you do this. Ask teachers, what's one thing we can do to make this school better? Teachers spend 3 or 4 or 5 hours working on it, make a presentation to their colleagues on something they can do to make the school better. You think you'd come up with any good ideas that way? Holy smokes, I think that'd be amazing. Now, let's push it a little bit, all right? How about genius hours for students? This is an idea that is spreading like crazy among students. Let's take this down to the students. Genius hours are being done in classrooms all over America now. It's so awesome. This 28-year-old woman at a credit union comes up with this idea, and suddenly school children around America are doing this. A genius hour. You can go put genius hour into Google, go to geniushour.com. If you're a classroom teacher, imagine if you gave your students 1 hour of autonomy, what they would do. I'll give you another example of this. Teachers are now doing, for their students, FedEx days. This teacher did a FedEx day. His name is Josh Stumpenhorst, Naperville, Illinois. He says he wants to do a FedEx day. His principal says, no, you can't call it that. So he says, okay, I'll have an innovation day. 1 day on a Friday. Kids work on whatever project they want and then show it to the rest of the class. Let me show you this is so powerful, he won Illinois State Teacher of the Year. He also wrote about his experience. Here's what he wrote about on his blog. He says, as students were walking out at the end of the day on Friday, one student stopped me and asked, can we do this again tomorrow? I responded with, well, I would love to, but tomorrow is Saturday, in a half-joking manner. The student looked me dead in the eyes and replied, I would come back tomorrow to do this again. That's engagement, folks. That's what autonomy does. Let me say a quick word about mastery, and then I'll wrap up. Very simple here. I'll give you one study and then a bunch of takeaways. Study done by the great Teresa Mobile at Harvard Business School. She did this remarkable piece of research where she went to 8 or 9 organizations in North America. She had 8 or 9 volunteers at 8 or 9 organizations. She had them, they volunteered to receive an email at the end of every day. The email said, how was your day? Were you motivated or not motivated? They responded to the emails. Essentially daily diaries of their day-to-day motivation on the job. Far more accurate than asking people, how was your week 2 weeks ago? We all know what our day was like at the end of the day. Most of us have no memory of what happened 2 weeks ago, right? She compiles 12,000 daily diary entries of people's day-to-day motivation on the job. She crunches the number. The single biggest motivator, it wasn't even close, was this: making progress in meaningful work. The days people were making progress were the days they were motivated. The days people were making progress were the days they felt good about their work. The days they were making progress were the days they said, I'm psyched to come in the next day. The days they were making progress were the days they said, you know what, I want to stick with this profession. I want to stick with this organization. Single biggest motive. This is, I think, the most important piece of research in talent in the last 15 years. The biggest motivator is making progress. But here's the thing. I mean, we can correct this. Progress depends on feedback. The only way you know whether you're making progress is if you're getting information on how you're doing. If you want to drive from here to Charlotte and you don't have a GPS, you don't have road marker signs, you don't have an odometer, you don't have a speedometer, how do you get there? Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Is this the right direction? And I think that most organizations are feedback deserts. This is a big issue for recruiting young teachers and young professionals in anything. We have a cohort of young people who their entire life goes like this. Since they were born, they use computers in elementary school, internet in high school, internet in college. They text and it gets there instantly. They receive a text from Belarus, it gets to their phone instantly. They play games, they get a score, they press a button, something happens. Rich, regular, robust, meaningful feedback every day of their life. And then we stick them into large organizations, whether it's a school district or a company, and we say, welcome to this alternative universe. Here, instead of having this rich, regular feedback as part of the oxygen you breathe, in this alternative universe, you get feedback once a year in an awkward kabuki theater conversation with your boss. Totally antithetical. So what can we do to get teachers the feedback that they need? One idea: do-it-yourself performance reviews. Teachers, at the beginning of the month, set out your goals, what you want to accomplish, what you want to learn. At the end of the month, call yourself into the office. Watch the Olympics. Watch the Olympics. You see it already. This is what high performers do in every field. Watch these Olympians. This is what they do. They set their own goals. They get their own feedback. Do it with a team. The other thing, skip that for a second. The other thing is Willie mentioned monthly one-on-ones. It's a great idea. I think that the administrators in school buildings need to step up. I know they have a lot of work to do. Monthly one-on-ones. Don't do this feedback once a year. Try it once a month. And the companies that are reinventing performance reviews out there are doing some really remarkable things. They're meeting every week. They're meeting every month. And you know what they're doing? They're taking a certain portion of a monthly meeting and saying, in this monthly meeting, we're going to talk about your career long-term. In this monthly meeting, next monthly meeting, we're going to talk about what you love about your job and what you loathe about your job. In this part of the monthly meeting, we're going to talk about barriers that we can remove. So we got to look for ways to increase the metabolism of feedback inside of organizations. One last thing. Let's talk about purpose here. When I was here a few years ago, I actually used this quotation. I want to bring it back because I think it's still an urgent question. It's this. From a guy who actually used to work in the Charlotte School District. He was a deputy superintendent of Fairfax County Public Schools in Northern Virginia. He's now at George Mason. He said something that goes to the heart of the issue here. He said this: we need to prepare our kids for their future, not our past. And I think a lot of what's going on in education these days, in education policy, is preparing people for my past, not for their future. And I think what we have to do is we have to recognize that our kids' future depends on treating teachers like professionals, not treating teachers like automatons, not treating teachers like interchangeable parts, not treating teachers like, but treating teachers the way, with the reverence with which we treat other kinds of professionals. That begins with paying enough, paying enough, paying enough, raising the base pay of salaries, getting rid of these ridiculous merit pay schemes, treating teachers like professionals. I think if we do that, we can prepare our kids for their future and not our past. Thanks for having me.